The night my brother signed away my name, I was lying in a hospital bed 3 states away, convinced I was dying. Not metaphorically, not dramatically. I mean, I genuinely believed, at 2:47 in the morning, with a morphine drip in my arm and a nurse, who kept appearing at the door to check my oxygen levels, that I was not going to make it to morning. The pain had been that kind, the kind that clears out all the noise and leaves you with nothing except the bare question of whether you're going to survive it. And somewhere in that fog, I trusted the people who were supposed to love me. That was my first mistake. My second was not reading the documents they sent me until it was almost too late. I'm going to try to tell this in order, because the order matters. It doesn't make sense if you start in the middle, and I've caught myself starting in the middle every time I try to talk about it, jumping straight to my brother's face when I finally confronted him, or the look on the attorney's face walked into that office. So I'm going to go back to the beginning, even the parts that make me look naive. Especially those parts. I grew up in a house that felt, from the outside, like a good one. My parents were married for 31 years. We had a yard. My mom kept a garden along the back fence. Tomatoes, zucchini, too much basil every summer. My brother is 4 years older than me, and growing up we were close in the way siblings are when they're the only 2 people in the house who understand the pressure of living under the same roof as our father. My father was not a cruel man. I want to be careful about how I say that, because it's true and it matters. He wasn't cruel. He was just certain. He had a way of making decisions that he never really discussed with anyone else, and he expected those decisions to hold. When he died 3 years ago of a heart attack that came with very little warning, I was in Portland for work, and I got the call from my brother while I was standing in a hotel elevator. I remember the elevator doors opening and closing twice because I didn't move. My mother had already been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's by then. She was still living at home, still managing, but the diagnosis had shifted something, in her, in all of us. My father dying made it urgent in a way it hadn't felt before. The plan, such as it was, had been my brother's idea. He had a bigger house, a spare room on the ground floor. He said it made sense for our mother to move in with him, and on paper, it did make sense. He had the space. He was only 20 minutes from her doctor's, and his wife didn't work outside the home at the time. I was in a 1-bedroom apartment in another state, building something that still felt fragile and unfinished. I was 31. I was not in a position to argue with logistics. What I didn't know, what I didn't think to look for, was that, in the process of arranging all of this, my brother was also quietly rearranging everything else. My mother's estate, what there was of it, was not complicated. The house, some savings, a small investment account that my father had kept for decades without ever touching. My parents had a will made years ago that split everything evenly between my brother and me. My mother was still alive. The will wasn't relevant yet. But there's a concept called a power of attorney, the legal authority to make decisions on someone else's behalf. And 3 months after my father died, my mother signed one. I found out about it much later. She signed it on a Tuesday afternoon in the living room of my brother's house. A notary came to them. My brother had arranged it. My mother, who was still lucid, who was still herself, signed her name on a form that gave my brother legal authority over her financial decisions. She thought it was just paperwork. She thought it was a formality, something to have in place in case things got worse. She told me later, after everything, that she hadn't understood the scope of it, that she'd trusted him to explain it to her. He explained just enough. I want to be careful again here because I don't think my mother was stupid. She was 63, and she had just buried her husband, and she was adjusting to a diagnosis that was changing the shape of her future. She was tired. In a way I don't think I can fully understand yet. When someone you trust sits next to you and says, "Sign here," sometimes you sign. I was living my life 3 states away, and I didn't know. For 2 years, things seemed fine. My mother was stable. I visited when I could. Holidays, her birthday in May, a long weekend in October that year when the leaves were changing and the 3 of us drove out to the countryside and had lunch somewhere with terrible service and good pie. My brother and I had the ordinary kind of adult-sibling relationship, group texts, the occasional phone call, mild tension about logistics. Nothing that felt like a warning. Then I got sick. It started as what I thought was the flu. Aches, exhaustion, a low fever that kept creeping back. Then I started having numbness in my hands. Then a pain in my side that I kept explaining away until I couldn't explain it anymore. By the time I went to the emergency room, I had a mass that needed to come out immediately, a surgery scheduled for the following morning, and a very calm doctor who used the word complex in ways that I was still trying to interpret. I called my brother from the pre-op room. He said all the right things. He said he'd come if I needed him to. He said to keep him updated. I told him I would. I had surgery. I was in the hospital for 9 days. I was in more pain than I have words for, and I was alone in a city where I had work friends, but not the kind you call at midnight, and I was scared in a way that I hadn't been since I was a child. I kept calling my mother, but she was hard to reach by then because her tremors had gotten worse, and my brother's wife managed the phone in the evenings. On day 4, my brother emailed me a document. I want to tell you I read it carefully. I want to tell you that I sat up in my hospital bed and went through it line by line. But I was on pain medication that made everything soft and slow, and the email said something like just some paperwork Mom's attorney put together, routine stuff, and I was too tired to question it. He needed a signature. I gave him one, digital, sent from my phone. I went back to sleep. I didn't think about it again until 3 weeks later, when I was home, recovering, and I got a piece of mail from an attorney's office I didn't recognize. My first instinct was to set it aside. Junk mail, or something for the previous tenant, or one of those vague legal notices that turns out to mean nothing. But the name on the envelope was mine, spelled correctly, and the return address was a law firm in my brother's city. I opened it sitting on my kitchen floor because that's where I'd sorted the mail. It was a notice informing me that a deed transfer for my mother's home had been recorded. The property, the house where I grew up, the house with the garden along the back fence, had been transferred out of my mother's name, into my brother's name. Entirely, not split, not partially, entirely. My signature was on the transfer document. I have thought about that moment many times since. The specific sensation of reading something that your brain refuses to accept on the first pass, so it makes you read it again and again. I read that letter 4 times on my kitchen floor before my body caught up to what my mind already understood. He had used my power of attorney to arrange the transfer. He had sent me the document while I was in a hospital bed on pain medication and told me it was routine. My mother had signed because she had trusted him to explain it, and he had explained it the way he'd explained everything. Just enough, and no more. The house was gone. I cried for about 20 minutes. Then I stopped crying, and I thought about what to do. The first thing I did was call my mother. It took 3 tries to get through, but she picked up on the 3rd, and she sounded tired but like herself. And when I told her what I had received in the mail, there was a long silence on her end. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "He told me it was a formality." There it was. She hadn't understood. She had signed something my brother characterized as paperwork, and she had trusted him because he was her son, and she was tired and grieving, and he was right there. She hadn't known the house was being transferred. She hadn't known what she was signing. Neither had I. The second thing I did was find an attorney. I want to be honest about how frightening this part was, because I think people who haven't been through it assume that if you have a legitimate case, the legal system is straightforward. It is not straightforward. It is expensive and slow and full of language that feels deliberately designed to make you feel powerless. I spent 3 weeks just finding someone who could take my case, and by the time I sat down across from an attorney named Mr. Hartley, a quiet man in his 60s who used a yellow legal pad and didn't look up much when he wrote, I had a folder full of documents and no real idea whether any of it would matter. He looked through everything slowly. He asked me specific questions. When had I signed? What was my condition at the time? Did I have hospital records from those dates? Did I have the original email my brother sent? Did I have a copy of the power of attorney document my mother had signed? I had most of it. I had my hospital records. I had the email still in my inbox. I had the deed transfer notice. I did not have the power of attorney document because I hadn't known it existed until recently, but Mr. Hartley said he could get it. He made a note on his yellow pad. Then he said, "This is worth pursuing." I don't know if I've ever been so relieved by so few words. What followed was months of process. Subpoenas, depositions, document requests, responses from my brother's attorney that were so dismissive in tone that I had to set them down sometimes and breathe before I could continue reading. My brother, for his part, maintained that everything had been done correctly, that my mother had understood the transfer, that I had willingly signed the document, that this was a family matter being mischaracterized. He said this even when I had the hospital records. He said this even when the attorney presented the timeline. The dates of my surgery, the date of the email, the date of my signature, the medication logs from my hospitalization. He said this with the specific confidence of someone who has never believed he would be held accountable. There was a moment, maybe 2 months into the process, when I almost gave up. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. The financial cost was real. The emotional cost was real. I was still recovering physically, still dealing with follow-up appointments and results, and the ongoing uncertainty about my own health. And on top of all of that, I was trying to reconstruct the story of my own family's betrayal in enough detail to present it to a stranger in a courtroom. There were nights when I sat at my kitchen table with the folder of documents in front of me and thought, maybe it's easier to just let it go. Then I would think about my mother's garden. I would think about the tomatoes along the back fence and the way she used to stand there in the early morning with a coffee mug, just looking at it, before the day started. The house was her house. It had been her home for 26 years, and my brother had taken it, quietly, on paper, while I was too sick to notice, and my mother was too trusting to question. I did not let it go. The deposition was the hardest part. My brother sat across a table from me for the first time in 8 months, and he looked, more than anything, annoyed. Not guilty, not ashamed. Annoyed, like I was a complication he hadn't anticipated. His attorney asked me questions designed to suggest I had been lucid and informed when I signed the document. My attorney asked my brother questions about what exactly he had told me the document was, and why he had sent it while I was hospitalized rather than waiting. My brother said he hadn't wanted to bother me with legal details. My attorney wrote something down without reacting. I have replayed that exchange many times. The resolution, when it came faster than I expected. 3 weeks after the deposition, my brother's attorney reached out with a settlement proposal. It wasn't everything. It was never going to be everything, because that's not how settlements work, but it was real. The house could not simply be transferred back, because my brother had already used it as collateral for a refinance. What I received instead was a cash payment equal to half the appraised value of the property at the time of transfer, plus a renegotiated arrangement for my mother's care, going forward, that was no longer entirely under my brother's control. A neutral third party, a professional guardian, someone appointed by the court, now has oversight of my mother's financial decisions. My brother did not go to prison. I want to be honest about that. What he did was wrong, and it cost him a great deal of money, and the oversight arrangement means he no longer has the financial control he'd had for the past 3 years, but he did not face criminal charges. The attorney explained to me that the line between civil fraud and criminal fraud in cases like this is narrow and difficult, and that what we had was strong enough to win civilly, but not necessarily enough to guarantee a criminal conviction. I asked if that felt fair. He paused for a long time before he answered. He said, "It's what the law allows for. Whether it's fair is a different question. I think about that a lot." The last time I saw my brother was at the courthouse the day the settlement was finalized. We didn't speak. We stood in the hallway about 15 feet apart while our attorneys spoke to each other, and at one point he looked at me, and I looked back at him, and I thought about all the times I had called him from hotel rooms and airports, and late nights when I needed to hear a familiar voice. I thought about the year our father died and how we had stood together in the driveway of our parents' house after the funeral and not said much, and it had been enough. I thought about the person I'd believed him to be. Then his attorney touched his arm and he looked away, and that was that. My mother and I talk more now. She lives in a smaller place, an assisted living community that she resisted at first and has, I think, genuinely come to like. She has her own room, a window that faces a courtyard with some raised garden beds that she can actually reach from a wheelchair on her bad days. She called me last week to tell me the zucchini was coming in. I live in Tennessee now. I moved last fall, mostly for a job, partly because I wanted somewhere that didn't feel like a chapter I was still stuck in. My apartment has a good kitchen and a dog I adopted in March named after no one, and on most mornings I make coffee and stand at the window for a while before the day starts. I'm still not sure what the lesson is. I've thought about what I would tell someone in the same position, someone who trusts a sibling, and discovers that trust was a door left open to something they never thought to protect against. I don't have a clean answer. I think the honest one is this. The people most capable of hurting you are the people you never thought to be careful around. And being careful isn't a betrayal of love. It's just what you owe yourself when love alone isn't enough. The garden at my parents' house still exists, as far as I know. I don't know if anyone tends it. I don't know if my brother's family eats the tomatoes or lets them go. I have thought about driving by the next time I'm in the area just to see. I haven't done it. I haven't done it yet. When it doesn't feel like driving towards something unfinished. Until then, I have a window and a dog and a courtyard zucchini update from my mother on Tuesdays. Some days, that's enough. Most days, it actually is.